She said love wasn't for her anymore, but every time she smiled through her sadness, I couldn't help believing it still was. I first met her on a late September afternoon, the kind of day where the air feels half warm, half lonely. The café sat by the lake, framed in orange leaves and soft silence, and she moved through it like she belonged to both. Her name was Clara, though everyone in town said it with a kind of reverence, like they were talking about someone who'd once been more, and still carried the echo of it. I was 25, a writer who'd run out of words. My stories had started to feel hollow, and I thought a change of scenery might help. I found a part-time job at her cafe, just mornings and slow afternoons, but it was enough to see the way she moved through her world. She wasn't loud or dramatic. She didn't try to fill silence. She fit into it, the way sunlight fits through old curtains, quietly, meaningfully. She wore simple things. Faded denim, soft sweaters, her hair tied loosely as if she hadn't looked in a mirror that morning but still somehow looked put together. Her face held no makeup, yet her eyes, a kind of tired hazel, seemed to hold more stories than I could ever write. When she smiled, it wasn't automatic. It was deliberate, careful. Like she had to give herself permission first. The locals adored her. They said she'd once been married, no one knew to whom, and no one asked. Someone mentioned she'd stopped playing the piano after that. There was an old upright one in the corner, its keys covered in a film of dust, sitting beneath a window that watched the lake. Sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, her fingers would hover just above the keys, never pressing down, just remembering. One afternoon, when I caught her doing that, I asked, "You play?" She smiled faintly but didn't meet my eyes. "Used to. Why'd you stop?" I asked gently. She looked out the window before answering, her reflection faint in the glass. "Because some things lose their meaning when shared again." I didn't know what she meant then, but I remember how she said it, soft, steady, as if the words were a truth she'd already made peace with. It wasn't bitterness. It was acceptance. And somehow, that made it sadder. That night, I stayed late to close the cafe. The world outside was dark and still, and I found myself staring at that piano. I pressed one key, just one, and the sound echoed through the empty room. Faint, out of tune, but still alive. Maybe that's what drew me to her. Not the beauty people notice first, but the quiet ache she carried like a melody waiting for courage to return. She said love wasn't for her anymore, and I didn't argue. I just knew, somewhere deep down, I wanted to understand why. I didn't know it yet, but in that small cafe by the lake, between her silence and my curiosity, something fragile had already begun to take root. Mornings at the cafe became quieter after that conversation. Maybe it was me who'd changed. Maybe I'd started listening differently. I noticed the way Clara's hands moved when she made coffee, gentle, deliberate, almost tender. She never rushed, even when customers waited. Every motion seemed to carry a calm I couldn't explain. She spoke little, but when she did, it was with a softness that made people lean in just to catch every word. Sometimes she'd ask about my writing, never in detail, just small, careful questions. And when I told her I wrote stories about people trying to heal, she smiled faintly and said, "That sounds like fiction most people need." I began showing up earlier each day, long before the cafe opened. I'd help her set up chairs, lights, the first pot of coffee. She never asked for help, but she never stopped me either. There was comfort in the quiet rhythm we built, two people moving in sync without needing to talk about it. One morning, I came in to find her standing by the piano. The sun was still low, spilling golden light through the window, and she was running her fingers across the keys, not pressing, just tracing. Her eyes were distant, lost somewhere I couldn't follow. When she noticed me, she quickly pulled her hand back. "I didn't hear you come in," she said, a little embarrassed. "It's beautiful," I told her, nodding at the piano. "It feels like it misses you." She gave a short laugh, the kind that wasn't really laughter. "Maybe. But some things, when you stop giving them meaning, they stop asking for it." I didn't know how to answer that, so I just smiled. "I don't think that's true. Some things wait." Her eyes met mine then, for just a second. There was warmth there, and a hint of fear. Like she wanted to believe me, but didn't trust herself enough to try. That day, our conversation stretched a little longer. We talked about small things, favorite books, songs, the smell of rain. She told me she liked thunderstorms but hated umbrellas. I told her I like silence but only when it was shared. There were pauses between our words, not awkward ones, but gentle silences that felt like exhaling after years of holding your breath. Once, as she leaned over to wipe a table, a strand of hair slipped loose from her bun. Without thinking, I reached out and tucked it behind her ear. Her breath caught, just barely. She didn't pull away, but she didn't look at me either. After a long moment, she whispered, "You're too young to understand what people lose when they stop believing." I smiled quietly. "Maybe. But I know what it's like to want someone to believe again." She said nothing. But when I turned to leave, I saw her looking at the piano, fingers resting softly on the keys, like maybe, just maybe, she was starting to remember what hope sounded like. The rain came without warning that afternoon, soft at first, then insistent, drumming against the café windows like it had something urgent to say. Most customers left early, hurrying into the mist with umbrellas and half-finished coffees. By evening, it was just the two of us. Clara locked the door, turned the sign to closed, and sighed, not out of exhaustion, but that quiet kind of relief that comes when the world stops asking for you for a while. "You can head home if you want," she said, wiping down a counter. "Not in this storm," I replied, glancing outside. The lake had turned silver under the rain, ripples shivering across its surface. "Besides, I like how it sounds." She smiled faintly, not looking up. "You'd like the sound of anything if you could write about it." She was teasing, but gently. I liked when she teased me. It made her seem lighter, almost younger. We sat near the window, the rain tracing lines down the glass like veins of memory. The world outside was blurred, and inside, everything felt too clear. I asked about her favorite music, her childhood, the first time she'd played piano in front of someone. She answered most of it, until I asked why she stopped. Her gaze drifted toward the old instrument. "Because it stopped being about joy," she said finally, "and started being about surviving." The words hung there, quiet, raw. I didn't push. I just listened, and maybe that was what she needed most. Someone who didn't ask her to explain her pain, just to share space with it. After a long silence, she looked at me. "You ever lose faith in something you thought you'd always love?" I thought for a moment. "Writing," I admitted. "For a while, I stopped believing words could fix anything. They just felt like echoes. And now? Now I think they don't need to fix. They just need to feel true." She nodded slowly, eyes softening. The rain grew louder, blurring the world to just us. I don't know when it happened, but our hands were suddenly close, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. I hesitated, then placed my hand over hers. Her fingers stilled, tense at first, then relaxed under my touch. "Clara," I said quietly, "you don't have to believe in love again. Just don't close the door on it completely." She looked down at our joined hands, then whispered, "Don't make me believe in something that won't last." Her voice cracked a little on the last word, and something inside me ached. I wanted to tell her it could last, that I wasn't like whoever hurt her. But I didn't. Some truths are better shown than spoken. We stayed that way for a long time, her hand in mine, the rain as our only witness. There was no confession, no promise, no grand gesture. Just the fragile comfort of two people who, for one evening, forgot how to be lonely. The storm passed overnight, leaving the world washed clean. The next morning, the lake shimmered under pale sunlight, and the café smelled of rain-soaked wood and freshly ground coffee. Clara moved through the quiet space with her usual calm grace, but something about her felt different, softer around the edges, less guarded. She greeted me with a small nod, the faintest curve of a smile. Maybe it was the leftover calm from the rain, or maybe it was what we didn't say the night before that lingered between us, gentle, unspoken, but very alive. That afternoon, when the cafe emptied out, I found her sitting by the piano again. She wasn't touching it, just staring, like someone looking at an old photograph that still made them ache. I hesitated at the doorway, then said, "You know, it probably hates being ignored." She laughed, a soft, genuine sound that caught me completely off guard. "It's a piano," she said. "I doubt it has feelings." "Maybe not," I said, walking closer, "but I think it remembers what it was made for." Her eyes flicked to mine, cautious but amused. "You're impossible. And you're stalling," I countered gently. She sighed, but it wasn't annoyance, more like surrender. "It's probably out of tune." "Then let me fix it." I'd learned a bit about tuning years ago, helping a friend in college, and that afternoon, I brought in a small tuning kit. She watched me work, arms folded, pretending to be unimpressed, but her curiosity gave her away. Every time I struck a key, she'd wince at the sharp notes, then smile when they softened into harmony. When I finished, I nodded toward the bench. "Try it." She hesitated, fingers trembling slightly as they hovered above the keys. The moment she pressed down, the sound filled the cafe, hesitant, delicate, but beautiful. Her melody was slow, full of pauses, as though she was searching for pieces of herself between each note. I sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder brushing mine. She didn't stop me. For a few minutes, there was no past, no fear, just music and the faint thrum of our hearts moving in rhythm. The sunlight through the window caught the strands of her hair, turning them gold. When she finished, she stayed still, hands resting lightly on the keys. I whispered, "You look like someone who just remembered what it's like to feel alive." She turned to me slowly. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but something gentler, something healing. "Don't make me start needing this," she said quietly. "I'm not making you," I replied. "You already do." For the first time, she didn't correct me. She just smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes, and in that small, sunlit cafe, I realized something had shifted. She wasn't the woman who'd stopped believing anymore. Not completely. And maybe, for the first time, either was I. The week after she played the piano felt different, lighter, warmer, almost hopeful. The music stayed in the air even after the last note had faded. I'd catch her humming sometimes, quietly, as she arranged flowers on the counter or wiped tables. It wasn't much, but to me, it felt like a beginning. But beginnings have a strange way of scaring the people who stopped believing in them. It started subtly. One morning, she wasn't there when I arrived. A note on the counter said she'd switched her shift to evenings. Then, another day, she left early, saying she had errands. Her laughter, the one that had slowly returned, began to vanish again. The space between us stretched thin and quiet. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe she needed time. Maybe I had imagined the connection we shared. But then I saw the way she avoided my eyes. Not out of disinterest, but out of fear. The kind of fear that comes when something starts to matter again. One evening, I stayed behind after closing, waiting for her. When she came out from the back room, she looked surprised, and a little tired. "You shouldn't still be here," she said softly, setting down a tray. "I know," I replied. "But I needed to ask, did I do something wrong?" Her eyes flickered, uncertain. "No. You didn't. Then why are you avoiding me?" For a long time, she said nothing. The cafe clock ticked in the silence, each second louder than the last. Finally, she whispered, "Because this feels too familiar. I've been here before, trusting, hoping, believing. And I don't survive that kind of fall twice." Her words hit quietly, but they hurt all the same. I took a breath, keeping my voice steady. "I'm not asking you to fall, Clara. I'm just asking you to stay." She shook her head. "You're young. You'll move on. You'll find someone who isn't this complicated." I stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint tremble in her hands. "You keep saying that like it's supposed to make me stop caring." Her eyes softened, that same quiet ache I'd seen before. "It's supposed to make it easier when you do." For a moment neither of us moved. I wanted to reach for her, but she turned away, busying herself with cleaning. I left before the words could get stuck in my throat. The next morning, the piano sat untouched again, its cover drawn closed like a secret. That night, I came back when the café was empty. On a slip of paper, I wrote a few simple words and left it on the piano. Some songs wait years to be heard again. I'll be here when you're ready to play. Then I walked home through the cold, wondering if love sometimes needed distance, not to disappear, but to learn how to come back stronger. Winter came early that year. The lake froze over before December, the sky hung heavy with gray, and the café felt colder without her laughter echoing between the walls. Clara still ran the place, but she'd built her distance back like a wall she knew how to fortify. Polite smiles, short conversations, no lingering glances. I still came every day, ordered the same coffee, sat by the same window. I told myself I was being patient, but really, I was holding on to hope, quiet, stubborn hope that she'd find her way back. One night, a snowstorm rolled in, blurring the world into white. I stayed home, writing half sentences that led nowhere, the sound of the wind pressing against the windows like a memory trying to get in. Around midnight, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, she was standing there, hair damp with snow, cheeks flushed, eyes shimmering with something between fear and relief. "Clara," I breathed, unsure if she was real or if I'd conjured her out of longing. "I shouldn't be here," she said quietly. Her voice trembled. But I didn't know where else to go. I stepped aside without a word. She walked in, leaving small puddles of melted snow on the floor. The air between us was thick with everything we hadn't said. She looked around the room, at the books stacked in corners, the typewriter by the window, the half-written pages scattered across the table. Her gaze lingered on the piano note I'd written weeks ago, now pinned to my wall. "You kept it," she whispered. "I meant it," I said simply. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep, she turned toward me. "You made me remember what it felt like to be seen," she said. "And that terrified me. Because once you start feeling again, you also start fearing the loss again." I nodded. "I wasn't trying to fix your past, Clara. I just wanted to be part of your present." Something in her expression softened, a fragile mix of gratitude and grief. She stepped closer until we were barely a breath apart. Her hand trembled as she reached up, fingertips grazing my jaw as if memorizing it. "I don't know if I can love like I used to," she whispered. "Then love differently," I said. "But don't stop." Her eyes met mine, uncertain, searching, and then she leaned in, resting her forehead against my chest. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her as if she might fade if I let go too soon. The world outside was all snow and silence, but inside, there was warmth again, quiet, real, steady. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The way she breathed against me, the way her fingers clung to my shirt, said more than words ever could. It wasn't a confession. It was a return. And in that small apartment, on that winter night, I realized, sometimes love doesn't come back with fireworks. It comes back softly, like snow, one flake at a time, until suddenly it's everywhere. Spring arrived slowly, like it was testing the world's patience. The lake thawed, the air softened, and the café smelled of sunlight and fresh beginnings. Clara stood behind the counter one morning, hair loose around her shoulders, humming quietly as she arranged wildflowers in a small vase. It had been months since that winter night, the night she came to my door. Since then, we hadn't rushed anything. No dramatic declarations, no promises whispered under candlelight. Just the quiet comfort of two people learning to breathe beside each other again. She still guarded parts of herself, corners of her heart that were off limits, untouched by time or words. But she smiled more now. Laughed more. Played the piano every other afternoon when the café grew still and sunlight painted gold across the floor. Her music had changed. It wasn't hesitant anymore. It carried warmth, light, and the kind of strength that comes only after breaking. Sometimes she'd play something soft and distant, and I'd close my notebook just to listen, knowing that no story I wrote could ever sound like that. One slow afternoon, I sat by the window, writing, when she placed a cup of coffee beside me. No words, just that familiar brush of her fingers against mine. She lingered a moment longer than usual. "You never told me," she said quietly, "why you stayed all those months when I kept pushing you away." I looked up at her and smiled. "Because I saw something worth staying for." She looked away, shy, which still amazed me. Clara, who once spoke like she made peace with loneliness, now blushed at kindness. Later that evening, after closing, I found her at the piano again. She was playing the same melody from months ago, the one she'd stopped halfway the first time. But this time, she finished it. When the last note faded, she turned to me with that soft, knowing smile. "Do you still write stories about people trying to heal?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm living one." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "You always know what to say." I moved closer, standing beside her. "Not always. But when I look at you, the words come easy." She reached for my hand, steady, certain, and interlaced her fingers with mine. It wasn't a grand gesture. Just real, honest closeness. Outside, the evening light spilled through the windows, turning everything golden. The world felt slower, quieter, right. When a customer walked in the next morning and complimented her music, she smiled and said, "Someone reminded me that some things are worth believing in again." I looked up from my table, and she looked back, that same silent exchange that said more than any confession ever could. She once told me love wasn't for her anymore. But standing there, sunlight in her hair, laughter in her voice, and music in her heart, I realized love had never truly left her. It had just been waiting for her to open the door again.